Hello there, everyone. My name is Reverie. This video is going to be a little different from my usual content. It's going to be a little more heavy, more serious. It's about someone whose loss weighed heavily, not just on me, but on the hearts of millions of gamers and game developers around the world. Let's turn the clock back a bit, back to July 2015. It was the day that shook the gaming industry as news spread of the passing of one of gaming's greatest figures, Satoru Iwata. More than a decade later, his impact can still be felt throughout the industry. Whether you're a lifelong Nintendo fan or someone who simply loves video games, chances are you felt his influence one way or another, even without realizing it. And that's what I want to talk about today. This video is my tribute to Satoru Iwata, a man who never let his title define his passion for games.
On my business card, I am a corporate president. In my mind, I am a game developer. But in my heart, I am a gamer.
When people talk about artists, game developers are rarely the first thing to come to mind. Usually it's painters, musicians, filmmakers, sculptors, or writers. But to me, video game development is one of the most unique forms of art because it brings all of those creative disciplines together. Artists build worlds. Musicians give them sound. Writers give them meaning. Programmers bring everything to life. Together, they create experiences capable of making us laugh, cry, and remember moments for years. Let me give you some background info. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, video games were still finding their identity. Home consoles like the Atari 2600 were rising in popularity, while arcade culture was booming worldwide. But the industry grew too quickly. In 1983, the video game market in North America collapsed, leading to widespread failure across the industry. It wasn't until 1985, when Nintendo released the Nintendo Entertainment System, that the industry truly began to recover. And in doing so, it didn't just save a business. It helped shape the future of an entire medium. One of the people who will grow up inspired by that future was Satoru Iwata. Satoru Iwata was born in Sapporo, Japan on December 6, 1959. Despite being the son of a politician, he found himself fascinated by something entirely different: technology. Even at a young age, computers weren't simply machines to him. They were opportunities, ways to create something that other people could enjoy. While still in high school, Iwata programmed one of his very first games, using nothing more than a calculator equipped with a magnetic card reader. By today's standards, that might not sound particularly impressive. But imagine trying to make a video game on a calculator. He'd bring these little creations to school to share them with his friends. watching them smile, watching them laugh, watching them have fun. That brought Iwata immense joy. And according to those who knew him, it was during those moments that he realized what he wanted to do with his life. In 1978, Iwata enrolled at the Tokyo Institute of Technology, majoring in computer science and engineering. While attending college, he spent much of his free time surrounded by people who shared his passion for technology and video games. Together, they discussed programming, new ideas, and the rapidly growing future of interactive entertainment. Those conversations eventually led many of them, including Iwata, to a small company known as HAL Laboratory. At the time, HAL wasn't the Nintendo partner we know today. It was a young studio filled with ambitious developers who simply wanted to make great video games. And Iwata quickly became one of its most valuable members. One of the things that stood out about him wasn't just his programming ability. It was his willingness to do, well, just about anything. If the company needed a programmer, he programmed. If they needed a designer, he designed. If they needed someone to coordinate development, he stepped in. If marketing needed help, he helped there too. Whatever the team needed, Iwata was there. One of the things that stood out about him wasn't just his programming ability. Whatever the team needed, Iwata was there. Its first credited game was Super Billiards for the MSX computer. From there, he will contribute to an ever-growing list of projects while HAL worked closely alongside Nintendo. Eventually, those efforts helped give birth to franchises that millions of players will come to enjoy. Among them, a little pink creature originally known as Twinkle Popo. Now, we know him as Kirby. But perhaps what impressed his co-workers the most wasn't simply how talented he was. It was how naturally people trusted him. Even during middle school and high school, Iwata had demonstrated remarkable leadership, where that same quality will follow him into HAL Laboratory, where colleagues respected him, not only for his technical ability, but the calm, thoughtful way he approached problems. In 1983, he was promoted to coordinator of software production. It was one of the first signs that people didn't simply see him as an excellent programmer. They saw him as someone worth following. Years later, HAL Laboratory will face several financial difficulties. The company came dangerously close to filing for bankruptcy. Many believed its future was uncertain, but someone believed HAL could still be saved: Nintendo's president, Hiroshi Yamauchi. At Yamauchi's request, Satoru Iwata became HAL Laboratories' president. It was an enormous responsibility, one that will ultimately change the course of his career, and years later, the course of Nintendo itself. But before he will become one of gaming's most respected leaders, he will first earn a very different reputation, one that developers still talk about to this day. When a game seemed impossible to fix, they called Satoru Iwata. By the early 1990s, Satoru Iwata had already earned a reputation as a talented programmer. But talent alone wasn't what made him stand out from the rest. It was his ability to solve problems that other people thought were impossible. One of the earliest examples came during the development of Earthbound. The project had run into serious technical difficulties, and continuing development had become increasingly difficult. According to those involved, Iwata examined the existing code and came to a blunt conclusion. Trying to fix it wasn't going to be enough, so he reworked major portions of it. That decision helped stabilize development and played a crucial role in getting the game across the finish line. Stories like that became increasingly common throughout his career. Even before officially joining Nintendo, Iwata frequently collaborated with the company on various projects. He contributed to games such as Balloon Fight and NES Open Tournament Golf, earning respect throughout the industry for both his technical skills and his versatility. But perhaps one of his most famous accomplishments came later, during the development of Pokemon Gold and Silver. Game Freak was facing a difficult challenge. The Game Boy cartridge had limited storage space, yet the team wanted to include not only the new Johto region, but also the original Kanto region as a post-game adventure. According to multiple accounts, Iwata developed compression tools and helped optimize the game's data, making that ambitious plan possible. Think about that for a second. One of the features that players remember most fondly about Pokemon Gold and Silver, returning to Kanto after becoming president, might not have existed without Iwata's work behind the scenes. And somehow, the stories don't stop there. When work began on Pokemon Stadium, Iwata reportedly recreated and adapted the battle system from Pokemon Gold and Silver in an incredibly short amount of time. A week. Not because he wanted attention. Not because he wanted to show off. But simply because that's the kind of programmer he was. According to Pokemon professor Sunkatsu Ishihara, Iwata's contributions were also instrumental in helping bring Pokemon to audiences outside of Japan. By this point, a pattern had become impossible to ignore. Whether it was rescuing troubled projects, finding elegant programming solutions, or helping developers overcome technical limitations, Iwata had become someone the industry could rely on. He wasn't just writing code. He was helping shape the future of Nintendo itself. And before long, Nintendo will ask him to lead it. For most developers, that will be the peak of their career. For Satoru Iwata, the next chapter was only beginning. In 2002, Satoru Iwata became the fourth president of Nintendo. For the first time in the company's history, someone outside the Yamauchi family will lead the company. That alone made history. But what truly set Iwata apart wasn't the title he had earned. It was the mindset he refused to leave behind. To many, he wasn't simply a president. He was still a game developer. Remember the quote from the beginning of the video? That wasn't just a memorable quote. It was the philosophy that guided nearly every decision he made. Unlike many executives, Iwata didn't distance himself from the people creating Nintendo's games. He understood the challenges developers faced because, not long before becoming president, he had been one himself. As stated in this article written by Thomas M. Lucas, one could describe him as a leader who actually understands the craft of making video games and what makes them fun. That philosophy shaped Nintendo's future. Iwata believed Nintendo didn't need to chase the competition. Instead, Nintendo should focus on doing what only Nintendo can do, creating experiences that anyone could enjoy. People of all ages, children, parents, the elderly, those who never picked up a controller in their life. Everyone. That philosophy gave us two of Nintendo's most successful systems, the Nintendo DS and later the Nintendo Wii. When the Nintendo DS was first introduced, many questioned the idea of a handheld with two screens. It seemed unconventional. Some even considered it unnecessary. But Iwata believed new ideas were worth exploring, even if they looked unusual at first. That result will become one of the best-selling handheld consoles of all time. Then came the Wii. While much of the industry was focused on graphical power and technical specifications, Nintendo asked a different question. What if everyone could play? Motion controls, simple design, local multiplayer, families gathering in living rooms, friends introducing games to people who had never considered themselves gamers before. That wasn't an accident. It was exactly the future Iwata had envisioned. Of course, not every decision was met with universal praise. Some critics believed Nintendo was reacting too slowly to changing industry trends. Others questioned whether the company was falling behind its competitors. But Iwata remained committed to Nintendo's identity. He believed success didn't come from copying someone else's path. It came from believing in your own. That same philosophy extended beyond the games themselves, but leadership is tested most when things don't go according to plan. And for Nintendo, those moments were still ahead. Success has a funny way of introducing us to someone, but it's failure that reveals who they truly are. For Satoru Iwata, that moment came during one of Nintendo's most difficult chapters. The Nintendo 3DS had a rough beginning. Sales fell far below Nintendo's expectations. Only a few moments after launch did the company make the difficult decision to lower the system's price. Then, the Wii U arrived. Despite introducing ideas that will later inspire the Nintendo Switch, the console struggled to find its audience. Its marketing left many players confused. Third-party support was limited, sometimes even non-existent. And many felt its hardware couldn't keep up with the competition. Before long, Nintendo found itself facing one of the most challenging financial periods in its modern history. When companies face times like these, there's usually one solution people expect: layoffs. Teams are reduced, projects are canceled, people lose their jobs. Satoru Iwata didn't want that. Instead, he looked in the opposite direction. rather than asking the people around him to make sacrifices. He made one himself. Iwata voluntarily reduced his own salary by half, not once, but on multiple occasions. He believed that asking talented developers to fear for their jobs will only make it harder for Nintendo to create the games that will lead it into the future. I've always admired that, because to Iwata, the people making Nintendo's games weren't simply employees. They were artists, programmers, designers, composers, the very people who turned ideas into experiences that millions of us will one day remember. If Nintendo was going to recover, he believed those people needed confidence, not uncertainty. And if someone had to carry that burden, he believed it should begin with him. Looking back, I think that decision tells us more about Satoru Iwata than any sales chart could ever. It wasn't just a financial decision, it was a human one. Even during those difficult times, Iwata never stopped finding ways to connect with players. One of his biggest ideas was speaking directly to fans through online presentations instead of relying entirely on large gaming events. Those representations will eventually become Nintendo Directs. Today, they become one of Nintendo's most defining traditions. Rather than relying solely on large trade shows like E3, Nintendo can now speak directly to its audience. Announcements become more personal, more focused, and sometimes a lot more fun. Whether he was joking alongside Reggie Fils-Aimé, appearing as a Mii, sharing game updates through Miiverse, or even becoming a puppet during Nintendo's 2015 E3 presentation. He never seemed afraid to laugh at himself. For a company president, that was surprisingly rare. For Satoru Iwata, it simply felt natural. They weren't just marketing. They showed a side of Nintendo that fans rarely saw. A company willing to laugh alongside its audience. And at the center of it all was a president who never seemed afraid to smile. But perhaps my favorite example of Iwata's leadership wasn't found during a console reveal or an E3 presentation. It was found in a series I discovered recently. Iwata asks, "These interviews weren't typical executive conversations. They felt more like developers sitting around a table, sharing stories with an old friend. They felt more personal, genuine even." Iwata wasn't interviewing people to promote products. He wanted to understand how ideas were born, how problems were solved, how experiences helped him get closer with the team. They talked about ideas, challenges, happy accidents, the little moments players will never normally get to hear about. And I think that's what made those conversations so memorable. They weren't interviews. They were developers talking about the thing they loved the most. Making video games. That's who Satoru Iwata was. A programmer, a leader, a listener. Someone who never believed the title on his business card mattered more than the people sitting beside him. That same philosophy carried over into Miiverse. For a brief time, players from around the world shared drawings, messages, screenshots, memories, and somehow the distance between people creating games and the people playing them felt smaller than ever before. That perfectly reflected something Iwata had believed all along. Video games are at their best when they bring people together. Then, in 2014, life presented Iwata with a challenge that no amount of programming could solve. He had been diagnosed with bile duct cancer. Following surgery, he stepped away for a time to recover. But even then, his passion never disappeared. He continued attending meetings whenever he was able. He continued helping guide Nintendo's future. And according to those who worked alongside him, He even contributed ideas to what will eventually become the Nintendo Switch. Even while fighting for his own health, he was still thinking about everyone else, the developers, the players, and the future of the company he loved. When I think back on this chapter of Iwata's life, I don't think about disappointing sales or struggling hardware. I think about the choices he made. When Nintendo needed a leader, Iwata was there. When developers needed someone to believe in them, he was there. When players needed a reason to smile, Iwata was there. And I think that's why so many people still speak about him with such admiration today. However, on July 11th, 2015, the gaming industry will lose one of its greatest leaders. But the story Satoru Iwata left behind was only beginning. On July 11th, 2015, the gaming industry lost one of its greatest leaders. But more importantly, it lost one of its greatest people. News of Satoru Iwata's passing spread quickly. Developers, players, journalists, friends, people from every corner of the industry came together to pay their respects. For many, it didn't feel like Nintendo had simply lost its president. It felt like gaming had lost one of its greatest advocates. Among those paying tribute was someone who has stood beside Iwata for years, not just as a colleague, but as a friend. Former Nintendo of America President Reggie
For Mr.
Fils-Aimé.
Iwata, it was not enough to repeat the words of Nintendo's mission to surprise and delight with the unexpected. He lived those words. He was unique. Finally, on a personal level, he was my boss, and he was my mentor, and he was my colleague. But most of all, he was my friend, and I'm a better person for it. And I think every gamer is better for having Mr. Iwata's vision and talent help inspire and shape the passion we all share. No matter what is going on in our lives or in the world, Mr. Iwata wanted Nintendo to be about putting smiles on people's faces. Nintendo, at its heart, is about making us feel younger than we are today. Mr. Iwata, I hope you're smiling right now.
I don't think there's a better way to describe the kind of person Satoru Iwata was. Not because those words came from another president, but because they came from someone who truly knew him. The tributes didn't stop there. Developers found their own ways to honor his memory. Some were obvious, others almost invisible. One of the most touching examples can be found in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. Many players noticed an NPC whose appearance and gentle manner reminded them of Satoru Iwata. Nintendo never officially confirmed the inspiration, but for countless fans, it felt like the developers had quietly left a piece of their friend inside the world they had created. A silent thank you, hidden in plain sight. And then there was one tribute that almost felt like a whisper. During the Nintendo Switch's earliest firmware, players discovered that the original Open Tournament Golf, developed for the Nintendo Entertainment System, by Satoru Iwata himself was hidden within the system, but unlocking it required something unusual. Not a cheat code, not a menu option. Players had to perform one of Iwata's signature presentation gestures while holding the Joy-Con controllers. Nintendo never officially explained why the game was there. Many fans have long believed it was a quiet tribute to Iwata, whether or not that was ever the intention. The gesture transformed the discovery into something more than an Easter egg. It became a moment of remembrance, one final connection between a man and the players who he had spent his life bringing joy to. Even after his passing, Satoru Iwata continued inspiring the people around him, not because they were told to remember him, but because they wanted to. He left behind a legacy of inspired individuals, both inside and outside of Nintendo. When I first started writing this tribute, I asked myself this question: what makes someone truly unforgettable? Is it the games they helped create? The company they led? The titles they held? I don't think so. I think it's something much simpler. It's the lives they touch, the people they inspire, the smiles they leave behind. That's why even all these years later, people still remember Satoru Iwata, not simply as Nintendo's president, not simply as a brilliant programmer, but as someone who reminded us that video games are, and always will be, about bringing people together. Legacies aren't measured by the titles we hold, they're measured by the people we inspire long after we are gone. And if there's one lesson Satoru Iwata left us with, it's that no title, no position, no business card will ever matter more than the passion you carry in your heart. I've been Reverie. Thank you for joining me in remembering a man who never let his title define his passion for games. Take care.